Let's talk about declarations now. So in Java, if you want to declare a variable, you need to specify the data type of the variable, followed by the name of the variable, and then optionally you can put an equal sign and an initial value to be stored in that variable. If you haven't done a lot of programming, I guess it's worth mentioning that a variable is a storage space in memory for a single piece of data. And so here our data that we're storing is the age, and we've named it appropriately. We've said it's of type int. So Java is going to set aside 4 bytes of memory for this age variable, and it's going to load into it the value 30. When you declare your variables, you have 2 ways you can deal with them. There's 2 kinds of variables. If you have a local variable, that's a variable that's declared inside of a method. So like the main method, it has its curly braces. If you declare a variable inside the main, we say that it's local to that method. It's only available to the main method. One of the rules of local variables is that you are required to initialize it. You have to give it a value before you can use it. Otherwise, you'll have a compiler error. Whereas a variable that's declared within the class but not inside of a method, so it's inside the curly braces of the class but maybe not inside, at this point we've seen the main, so not inside the method, we call that thing a field. Some people call it an attribute, but a field, this is a variable that's declared in the class but not in a method. One of the interesting things about a field is that you're not required to initialize them. Fields take on their default values. For numerics, they all default to a value of 0. For Boolean, the default value is false. Finally, if you declare a variable with the word final in front of it, that says that you cannot change that variable once you set a value to it. So a final variable, once it's been set, cannot be changed. Let's experiment with a few of those. I'm going to go ahead and in my Eclipse, I've already preloaded our files, our student files in here. And if you didn't do this already, this is the final video in the Eclipse chapter. We talk about importing in our student files into our project or into our Eclipse session. So I'm going to close all the unrelated projects. I'm only going to stick with chapter 4 here. Maybe in the examples directory, I'll build a new class. And this new class, I'm going to name test. I don't know, just something. And I'll have it insert the main for me. I'll click finish here. Well, whenever we have it insert the main for us, Java, it adds some extra comment characters in here. And I'll talk more about those in just a moment. But I'll just clear those off and we'll demonstrate a few things that were just described a few moments ago. Int age equals 30. I've typed that into the main. Question for you. Is age a local variable or is it a field? Well, age is defined inside of the curly braces of a method. And we say that anytime you declare a variable inside of a method, that's a local variable. If instead we had declared age up inside of the class, but not inside of a method, so it's in these curly braces of the class, then it would be considered a field. So to begin with, age is a local variable. Age equals 30 here. We said that you're not allowed, I'll type in sysout control space, you're not allowed to use a local variable unless it's been initialized. And so I did initialize it. I set it equal to 30, and I can print it out. Should work. Yep, says it's printing out 30. That's the value of the age variable. I'm not forced to initialize it immediately. I could declare the variable in one line, set a value to it in another line, and then use it. That's okay. Run that, and that works just fine. But if I forget to initialize the variable, I'm going to comment out the line. If I do 2 slashes, That means take everything from this point to the far right, anything to the right of this, and make it as if it's not part of the program. Most of the time we use comments to document our programs, but we can do something like this to experiment. Notice that Eclipse has given me some sort of indication there's a problem. It's underlined age with a red line. And if I hover over the top, it says the local variable age may not have been initialized. Well, it hasn't been. We commented out the line of code, or we'd set it equal to 30. And so if I try to compile this, I save it, we get that same error message. It says line 8, there is a problem. And if I were to run this, I'm going to try, but it really blows up. It says, you can't run this. There's unresolved compilation problems. That local variable may not have been initialized. We need to initialize local variables before we use them. Well, let's say that this wasn't a local variable, though. Let's say this was a field. Int age equals 30 up there. And we're going to talk more about this a little bit later on in the course. But anything that your main uses, since it's static, it needs to see static fields. So any field, any variables that your main wants to use, any fields your main wants to use, need to be tagged as static. Later on, when we get into some object-oriented stuff, we'll clean that up more. But notice that it's not giving me any kind of compiler problems anymore. I can run this just fine, and it's perfectly happy with working with age. Well, I guess that's not demonstrating anything yet, is it? Let me go ahead and not initialize it. Static int age, semicolon. So age is of type int, but we didn't give it a value. Question for you, what is going to print out here? If I print out the value of age, what's stored in age right now? That's right. When we run this, it's going to be 0, since that's the default value for an int. Anytime I do those questions that I'm asking you, feel free to get on that pause button on your video and think about it or answer it, and then start me up again. I don't want to pause myself too long, because then it's just dead air, but I'll give a few seconds for you to pause the video if necessary. Well, you could have, well, I'll just verbalize it. We're going to demonstrate this later on. With a field, one of the nice things about a field is it's available across the entire class. And so if I had several methods in this class, that field could be accessed by all of those methods. But instead, if that field was declared inside of a method, if it's a local variable, this local variable is local to the curly braces of the method. Therefore, it's not accessible anywhere else in the program. It's only accessible between these curly braces. So anytime you declare a variable, you can think of the curly braces that surround it as indicating the accessibility of it. Who can access it? Well, anything within those curly braces. And we'll talk more about things like public and private later on that have some effect on that as well. The only other thing I should mention is the word final here. Final int age equals 12. This shouldn't be a problem. It should compile and run just fine. But if I attempt to say age equals 15, it's not going to be happy with me. Recall from our discussion a few moments ago that a final variable cannot be reassigned. There's a big ugly message here, but the end result is we already set it a value. Once it's been set, it can't be changed. If this was not final, then this would be just fine to set a different value to it. So final variables cannot be modified. The book has the number of cards in a deck, 52. That's something that probably never changes. And so that's been marked as a final variable. Well, on the right-hand page here, we have a few things. There's a little paragraph on top that mentions comments. And I already talked about the double slash means comment to the end of a line. There's also another kind of comment where you can comment out multiple lines. You do slash star and you end with star slash. That says take all of those lines and comment them out. Make them as if they're not there. Anytime you do a slash star, the comment doesn't end until it encounters a star slash. There's another kind of comment that we won't get into just yet. It's a slash double star, and Java uses that for some documentation generation. The other thing, if I look over on this right-hand page, is that there's a code example, a little something that we can look at. It's called Initialized.java. Any of these code examples that occur in our workbook are going to be available in the examples package in the corresponding directory. So here we have Initialized.java. I'm just double-clicking on it, and I can load it up inside of my editor. And it shows here that we have some fields, a little comment on top that's describing them. And we also have a main that has some local variables. Finally, we're doing some printouts displaying the fields and the local variables and the values associated with each. What I'd like to have you do now that we're done with this page pair is why don't you go ahead and run Initialized.java and see how those fields get automatically initialized. See the values that are stored in there. And if you wanted to, you can experiment. You can make changes to this program. Maybe you omit the initialization of something or what have you. Feel free to play if you like. And do this on your systems. That way you get some good hands-on time.